I never actually said I had bought a house. I only mentioned that I was searching for one. It happened during a Saturday supper, the kind nobody dares skip. Not because anyone actually longs for my presence, but because skipping it would just hand them fresh ammunition. My sister was already holding court, ranting about preschool costs and kitchen mold, her latest headache. My mother, Evelyn Sharp, kept nodding along as if every issue was a dire health crisis. My father, Walter Sharp, was dozing off behind the mashed potatoes. I let it slip mid-chew. No flags, no warning. I've been considering getting a home just outside Ridgefield. That was all. But suddenly the mood in the room changed. Everyone's utensils froze in place. My sister's cup tapped too forcefully against her dish. Even Ella and Zoe stopped their ongoing crayon dispute to stare. My mother slowly turned my way. "I'm only browsing," I said, trying to sound casual. "Maybe a little cottage, 2 bedrooms, and some garden. Nothing fancy." Kara blinked a couple of times before flashing a smile. 4 bedrooms. She made the statement as if I'd confessed a plan to live underwater. Walter, my father, finally glanced up at me. "Are you sure this is a good moment? Is something wrong with Mapleview Flats?" I kept my tone calm and even. "No, there's nothing wrong. I just need a place that's truly my own." My mother, Evelyn, let out a gentle laugh, the kind that carried no real amusement. "Well, if you're looking to buy, we should have a conversation. There's a place close to Willow Glen. 4 bedrooms, spacious yard, excellent schools." I turned to face her. Why would I need 4 bedrooms? A dense, quick silence settled over the room. Kara answered for my mother. "We just thought it made sense with the children and everything, that you'd need the space." I kept quiet because this was all too familiar. My silence was always seen as agreement. Kara's troubles repeatedly ended up as my responsibility. Everyone just expected I would yield, because that was always true for me. My mother gave me a gentle, approving grin. Edith Bell, a friend from church, remarked that the process would move quickly. She suggested we could go look at it together next week. My sister agreed with a quiet nod. She mentioned that it even featured a finished basement. She explained that they would move out, giving me space. She said, "we," making sure not to say, "you." I dropped my gaze to my plate as a wave of disinterest in my food came over me. It wasn't anger I felt, nor was I particularly surprised. Instead, a chill crept into my chest, something absolute and unyielding. It wasn't fury or sadness. It simply meant it was finished. They were unaware, but I understood. That Saturday would be my final time at that table, listening to conversation pass over me as if I were invisible. When supper ended, I didn't return to Mapleview Flats. Instead, I kept driving. There was nowhere specific I intended to go, only unfamiliar roads I'd nearly forgotten. I passed beyond Ridgefield's outskirts, where silos replaced houses and fences disappeared into endless fields. Somewhere near exit 17, I switched the radio off. The droning sound of the tires became the only thing I heard. I wasn't upset, which would have been straightforward. Instead, I grew silent. Not in a tranquil way, but in the sense that something was coming apart beneath the surface. The last time I pushed back against my family, I was only 15. Kara, my sister, had taken my dress, torn the hem, and returned it as if nothing significant had happened. When I asked her to repair it, she told my mother, Evelyn, that I was making a big deal out of nothing. My mother agreed, reminding me she had more responsibilities to deal with than I did. I recall looking down at that dress, clutching the unevenly stitched seam, suddenly aware I'd been outnumbered in a group of 3. That dynamic never really shifted. My sister Kara always ended up with what she wanted: more attention, freedom, justifications. If Kara, my sister, messed up, someone else bore the blame. But whenever I achieved something, there was only silence. It was simply assumed. At 23, I secured my first position with full-time hours. On my lunch break, I reached out and called home. My mother, Evelyn, picked up the phone and immediately wanted to know if I had heard that Kara was expecting. "We're all so thrilled," she shared. I replied, "I was offered the position." She responded, "Wonderful, honey. I have to run. The meal's burning." At 29, I paid off my last student loan bill. I kept it to myself. It didn't feel deserving of any response. 2 years ago, after the water heater in my sister Kara's house gave out, I received a call. Not because my home was in Willow Glen. It wasn't because I had any expertise with pipes. I didn't. But their reasoning was, "You're the one who handles things." I transferred $85 that same afternoon. A thank you never came, only a message 4 days later. "Could you call Summit Community Bank for me? They're making it complicated." Just complicated. They weren't turning down the mortgage. They didn't say no to the third extension either. They were just being a hassle. That's the description they settled on when I explained I was too busy to visit on Thanksgiving. "Don't give us a hard time," they said. "You know how important this family is to my sister." And now, it seemed I was purchasing a home for her. I pulled off the road near the gas station that had been out of business for a long time. Although the windows were covered in plywood, the faded and damaged ice machine still sat at the entrance. I lingered in my car, watching as the wind toppled an abandoned shopping cart, imagining 2 bedrooms, a small garden, and a peaceful place to live. When I mentioned it, I had been absolutely serious. I wanted to wake up to calm, instead of a barrage of last-minute crises. I pictured having coffee outside on a porch, without anyone else's footwear gathering by the door. I longed for a life that required neither justification nor defense. Pulling out my phone, I made a new folder. I didn't bother giving it a name. No sentimental title, just blank. I filled it with property listings, notes about loan interest, evaluations of brokers, articles explaining septic systems, and warranties for roofs. It wasn't that I was trying to run away. What I was really doing was starting to create an opening for myself. The following Thursday, my mother, Evelyn, sent me a link. 4 bedrooms, finished basement, in the right school district. I stared at the message. Nothing ached in my chest. There wasn't a breath held in. I only felt a heaviness inside. My sister Kara texted me 10 minutes later. "Did Mom show you the house listing?" Ella and Zoe were already arguing about which room should be theirs. Which room? In my own home. I set my phone down, placing it face down on the counter, and resumed what I was doing, quiet and composed, as if nothing had shifted. Yet, something undeniably had. I chose not to answer my sister's message. Not immediately. Nor did I reply the following day. It just lingered there, unopened but not unnoticed, like a shoe abandoned in the hallway. I kept walking past it, fully aware of who left it and the reason they wanted me to deal with it. By Wednesday, I noticed I had 2 missed calls from my mother. There was one voicemail. "Hi, honey. I just wondered if you had received the pictures. Edith Bell mentioned that the 4-bedroom we had liked was hosting an open house. We could check it out together. Please don't overcomplicate this." I erased the voicemail without replaying it. That particular label never sat well in my gut. They had called me difficult whenever I wanted to skip attending church the week after my brother-in-law left. Whenever I refused to lend money or didn't feel like justifying myself, they used that same word. Being called that didn't mean I was irrational. It just showed I wasn't going along with what they wanted. That Saturday, I arrived for supper at my usual punctual time, just as I always did. I carried a bottle of wine I knew none of them would actually drink. I wore a cardigan my mother once commented made me look softer. My sister Kara was already there, Ella and Zoe tossing crayons under the dining table. My brother-in-law, Brian, lay dozing in front of the television. Evelyn hurried through the kitchen, orchestrating the commotion like it was a symphony. All the usual clatter filled the room, the same chairs, the same spot they had always expected me to take. I waited until after we'd passed the salad, until my father had quietly spoken grace, until the atmosphere felt dense enough for a pause in conversation. I announced that I had purchased a home. Nobody reacted physically. Instead of becoming quiet, the energy in the room simply faded away, as if a stage light had been suddenly switched off. My mother turned to face me. "You already made the purchase," I confirmed with a nod. "I finalized the closing last week." My sister Kara stared at me. "You never mentioned it." I said I hadn't seen a reason to tell anyone. My father, Walter, glanced up from his meal with a furrowed brow. "You went ahead without consulting anyone?" I kept silent, quietly folding my napkin and resting it in my lap. My mother parted her lips to speak, but then closed them again, forcing a small smile. "We just hoped you found something appropriate," she said. My sister Kara leaned in with a gentle tone. "It's just that Ella and Zoe were looking forward to it." I let that statement linger between us. Then I replied, "They have a place to belong. This isn't it." After that, there was only silence. I didn't require words from them. My meaning reached everyone. That evening, nobody followed me as I left. I left the dishes behind, grabbed my jacket from the hook near the entrance, and drove away without a word. It wasn't anything dramatic, just final. The sort of departure that didn't call for banging doors because it had already been shut, just not declared out loud. The next day, when I woke up, there were 2 texts from my mother, one from my sister. Each message said some version of the same thing. "You caught us off guard. Ella and Zoe are upset. You've changed. Become distant." Distant? That was the label they always applied when I stopped agreeing to everything. When I moved out at 21 instead of staying behind to help at home, I became distant. When I asked to spend New Year's Eve with friends another year, distant. And when I didn't shed tears at Kara's wedding, never mind the fact that I covered the cost of her wedding photographer. I silenced the group chat and put a temporary block on my sister that day. For the first time in ages, it felt as if I had finally put down a burden that had worn me out without me realizing it. Later that night, my mother, Evelyn Sharp, arrived unexpectedly at Maple View Flats. She hadn't called ahead. Instead, she simply knocked, her sharp raps like periods at the end of a sentence. I waited just inside, my heartbeat calm and even. I chose not to answer. She rapped on the door again. "Kara, I just want to talk," she called out, softer the second time. "You can't just lock us all out like this." Pressing my forehead to the door, I exhaled deeply. "I'm not locking you out," I answered without opening the door. "I'm simply deciding not to allow you in." She was silent for a while before her footsteps faded away. 10 minutes later, I received a message from my brother-in-law, Brian Matthews. Attached was a photo of Ella and Zoe Matthews, my nieces, lying in their bunk beds, each lifting hand-painted signs. "We miss you, Aunt Rachel. Come see us soon." I stared at my phone for what felt like forever. My thumb hovered, but I didn't respond. An hour later, a different photo arrived. Mason's crib was now wedged in the corner of Kara's room. Every time we try to move him, he wakes up. He needs to rest. I found myself begging inside, but guilt pressed down on my chest like a foreign hand, and still, I stayed silent. That evening, I opened my laptop and emailed the real estate agent yet again. I confirmed the closing date, when the utilities would be transferred, and the arrangements for the key exchange. I clicked on the folder I'd created earlier, the one tucked behind a blank label. Inside were blueprints, cost estimates, landscaping diagrams, and a list of herbs I hadn't learned to grow yet. I created a new document and titled it Life Unshared. After that, I closed my computer and went to sleep. I never asked anyone to come look at the house, not when I collected the keys, not as I moved through the vacant rooms. The sound of my footsteps was the only thing accompanying me. It didn't happen while I paused in the backyard, noticing that the quiet felt genuine rather than burdensome. There was no big reveal, no My Circle update, and no message to the family group, yet they still found out. My sister was the first to message me. My mother told her I had finished the deal. Why did I keep it to myself? I didn't reply. An hour later, she said it was 2 bedrooms. But wasn't there a sunroom as well? Maybe that would work for my nephew Mason's space. Then I received another message. I studied the messages, placing my phone aside. I let it vibrate on the kitchen counter until the battery ran out. That weekend, after my trip to the grocery store, I found my mother waiting outside Mapleview Flats. Her arms were folded and her lips pressed in a firm line. She didn't acknowledge me with a wave. She didn't have to say anything more. "You're being ridiculous," she remarked as I stepped out of the car. I chose to keep silent. "They're still your family," she went on. "That extra space isn't even being used by you," she added. I opened the trunk and removed my groceries, one bag at a time. "Kara, please don't pretend I'm not here. You're behaving like someone I barely know." I turned around to look at her directly. "I'm just acting like a person who's finally been offered an option." She recoiled, though it was barely noticeable. "They have absolutely nowhere else they can turn. They've had plenty of time to plan. We believed you were on the same page. You never bothered to ask me." She lowered her gaze. Her tone grew shaky, almost as if on cue. Kara was worn out. Mason kept everyone up all night. Ella and Zoe kept wondering why I didn't care about them any longer. I remained motionless, the bag of oranges in my hands suddenly feeling much heavier than before. "You always promised you'd be there for them," she murmured. "You always said you were the dependable one." I nodded silently, absorbing her words. She asked, "So why are you doing this?" I drew in a steadying breath before saying, "Because for once, I'm creating something that doesn't involve leaving the door open for everyone else." She stayed silent, her gaze drifting past me to the bag still clutched in my hands. Her eyes lingered on the building, Mapleview Flats, though I hadn't invited her inside. I stood there, waiting. She remained silent, and I made no invitation. When I finally closed the door behind me, the latch clicked more quietly than I'd anticipated. There was no slamming or commotion, just a clear boundary finally set. Their efforts continued. When their silence failed, they switched tactics to something louder, not by shouting, but by spreading word. My first call came from Aunt Ruth Winters. The last time we'd spoken was in 2018 after she forgot my birthday and sent Kara a fruit basket for hers. "Sweetie, your mother, Evelyn, has been terribly concerned about you. This business with the house, can't we simply sit down and talk like a family?" I chose not to respond. I just listened in silence. I have always been the one who keeps my cool. She continued, "And you realize your sister Kara has been having a tough time. She could really use your support." I thanked her for calling before hanging up. An hour later, I found myself tagged on My Circle. My sister had uploaded a picture of Ella and Zoe, beaming with chocolate-smeared cheeks as they stood before towers of packed boxes. The next day, my mother, Evelyn Sharp, sent me an email containing a letter. It wasn't a quick note but a full-page letter, PDF format, all laid out correctly, with her signature at the end. In her message, my mother, Evelyn, shared that she and my father, Walter, had dreamed we'd experience this period of our lives together. We had always envisioned a shared life in close proximity, with everyone in the family supporting one another as we had in days past. She brought up the home loan I had helped secure for them long ago, as well as the time I paid the medical bill when my father's insurance didn't cover it. She reminded me how often I had taken responsibility on my own initiative throughout the years. Then she looked at me directly and asked, "Why at this point? What's made you decide that distance is more important than your obligations?" I stayed silent. I printed her letter, folded it, and placed it with my legal documents. That evening, I tended the lavender growing in my window box, brewed some tea, and finally picked up the novel I'd meant to begin for 2 years. The stillness in Mapleview Flats felt peaceful, not isolating. There were no sounds of footsteps from above, no rattle of dishes I hadn't washed, no children's protests echoing through thin walls at bedtime, just the regular ticking of my own clock, a noise I realized I hadn't truly noticed in years. I didn't feel like I owed any explanations to anyone. And if people wanted to change the narrative, that was their choice. At last, I was the one in control of the story. I got a new phone number the following Thursday. There was no public announcement or mass text, just a discreet 15 minutes at Connect mobile outlet and a new SIM in my phone. I only gave the new number to my boss, my assistant, and 3 friends. I didn't share it with anybody else. I didn't update my information online and didn't leave a forwarding address. Once my lease at Mapleview Flats ended, I moved everything in a single trip using a moving company unfamiliar to anyone I knew, one that didn't leave any labeled boxes behind. My new cottage was both older and smaller than my apartment at Mapleview Flats. During the winter, the floors let out long creaks. If I let the hot water run too long, the pipes would groan and rumble. Still, the place was all mine. Every little sound came with a sense of belonging. I took it upon myself to paint the walls and assemble the shelves for my books with my own 2 hands, something people always claimed I never made time for. In the backyard, I planted a small garden. At first, I only tended to easy herbs, basil, rosemary, mint, keeping things gentle and unhurried. Nobody knew where I was. For the first time in what felt like ages, I woke up without reaching for my phone. There were no expectations, no shame, no snapshots of 4-bedroom setups or shared properties, no wordless punishments, only the birds outside my kitchen window. Every so often, I would take my mug of tea onto the porch, doing nothing, thinking nothing at all, simply allowing the daylight to come and go at its own pace. This wasn't running away. I wasn't hiding from anyone. I was holding on to a sense of belonging that was rightfully mine. They had taken so much, never bothering to ask. So I stopped responding. After that, they eventually stopped reaching out. The email arrived late one Thursday night. It came from my mother's account, yet in my mind I could clearly hear my father's voice. The writing was concise and formal, as if every word had been chosen for a sworn affidavit. They wrote that the decision had been made to sell their house. Retirement was far from what they had envisioned. Property values had dropped. It was always assumed that my sister's family would move into the place, but with everything so unsettled, they were now exploring alternatives. There was a noticeable pause halfway through the message, a hesitation I could sense even through words on a screen. We realize we've made mistakes, but families look out for one another. Your sister and her children deserve some security. Walter and I can't pretend we're still young. I read those words twice, not because the meaning escaped me, but because the message couldn't have been more obvious. They weren't looking for me to offer support. They wanted me to step back into a place I had never chosen. I left the message unanswered that night and the next. On Saturday morning, I ran the email off the printer, folded it into 3 sections, and tucked the paper into an envelope. Then, I slipped a single card inside. There was no letter, only my contact details for a financial advisor, An expert in senior housing transitions. Someone who could answer questions that I was no longer able to. I sent it off without including my own address. And as I let the envelope fall into the mailbox, I didn't feel guilt. I felt finished.